I have not been ordinarily disposed to exalt any person living or dead, but my boyish ignorance had invested Franklin D. Roosevelt with imagined qualities that I honored deeply. That foolishness was so ingrained in me that even today, when I see and hear him in old films on television, I have difficulty disliking that arch criminal. I walked from the entry gate onto the White House grounds in high spirits, confident that in minutes I would see President Roosevelt. When I got to the White House door, I didn't use the brass door knocker, but knocked with the knuckles of the clenched fist that held a $1 million gold certificate. That's from chapter 25 in James Shelby Downard's amazing book, The Carnivals of Life and Death. This is a Feral House book. Fascinating story and fascinating character. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth, special 4th of July edition, Independence Day. I do not remember who said this, but I think it was from 1984 by George Orwell, aka Eric Blair. He who controls the past controls the present, and he who controls the present controls the future. And what is a very sad fact in this country today is that the vast majority of people in this country do not know the history of this nation. And as I have pointed out before, it may be a ludicrous assertion that there was anything that the United States, quote unquote, declared their independence of all these many years ago. And of course, one of the principal things that the Declaration of Independence talks about is the charges against King George III, a list of grievances, as it were, that supposedly had been ignored time and time again, and in fact had been ignored and also added to by the actions or inactions of King George III. And one merely has to look at the history of the United States since the glorious days of the quote-unquote founding fathers of this country to see that we have had systematic abuses in this country by the government towards the people of the United States over and over and over and over again. And what we have today with the implementation of a total and complete tyrannical police state with agencies such as the Transportation Security Agency, the TSA, famous for their illegal searches and seizures, denying people the God-given right to travel, unless they subject themselves to harmful and deadly radiation being groped and fondled and illegally searched in direct violation of the Constitution, which, as you can clearly see, has absolutely no validity as long as the government chooses not to follow it, which it has done from the very beginning. So there is no past to look to for a golden age when the Constitution meant anything other than being an old piece of paper or parchment or vellum or whatever the hell it is. Now, the first thing I'd like to indicate to you for our quote-unquote independence, it seems to me rather odd that a country that was declaring itself independent of an empire and a king would choose as its flag a reworking of the very same elements of the flag of the oppressor nation that they are trying to separate from, and use the very same colors of that flag. Furthermore, that the flag itself, not only being very similar to the flag of the horrid country of the oppressor king that they were trying to declare quote-unquote independence from, having the same colors and a reworking of the same sort of symbols, would also be virtually identical to what should have been a hated enterprise, and that would be the East India Company, which was the overlord corporate controlling body which controlled a lot of the territory of the United States and around the world, being in effect the corporate arm of the City of London and the royal power, or the moneyed elite, the banking interests, whatever you want to call it, the elite. The same forces that are at work in society around the world today to shape and mold things to conform to their idea of what the future should represent for this country and for the world. So that's strike number one. Strike number two, so much for a country that believes in an addressing of grievances. And the very first case that we have of a major uprising in this country was the Whiskey Rebellion, where people were rightfully upset about the imposition of a whiskey tax in order to pay the debts of the federal government. And this is a case where the United States government actually got up a militia together to march on western Pennsylvania primarily, because that's where the bulk of the activity was, in order to smash and crush a rebellion. Now, there have been many others, most of them slave revolts, but you can also look to the Civil War New York draft riots, where ships of the United States Navy shelled New York City to quell the riots. That's correct. The federal government shelled the city of New York because of riots opposed to the completely ridiculous draft for the Civil War. Because if you had money, you could buy yourself out of it. Which, that's just another perfect example of the idea that this country was founded by people with money, power, and privilege, and everything that they constructed here was constructed in such a way to preserve their money, power, and privilege. If you happened to get something good as a result of it, being a plebe, a peon, someone of no account, no bloodline, no money, if you happened to get something good out of it, well, that was just happenstance. Everything was designed for the betterment of the rich, the conservation of the rich. And all we're seeing today is the end result coming about of this very thing, and that is oligarchical control by overlord corporations and international banking houses, where the Federal Reserve is interlinked with the International Monetary Fund and the very old moneyed families and the moneyed interests of Europe. And you also have the politicians in Washington, D.C., who are merely intermediaries between the corporate oligarchs and the people of this country. It's always been the same way. Back in the golden days, before we had any kind of federal regulation on what companies could or could not do, that many people want to look back to as being the days of so-called free-range capitalism, and when things were better, you had outright murder of people who were just fighting for basic, very basic sort of working conditions. That is, maybe put a support up in the mine so that 40,000 tons of rock don't fall on my head every fucking day. And because I protest because I want you to put up an extra timber every 10 motherfucking feet, you get Pinkerton agents hired by the corporations to come in and bust heads and kill people. And then because we want to join together and form a union, well, that can't do, because that'll cut into profits. So more Pinkerton agents and thugs and goons hired to come in, smash heads, and kill people. And this is all condoned by the government and even helped by the government, because the influence of corporations was such that they could get the army to come out and enforce their will. And we want to go back to this, when there was no regulation, where people could work in sweatshop conditions. Now, I want to remind you, this is supposed to be the land of the free, the home of the brave, where everybody can achieve something. How can you achieve anything in this country whenever it was never designed for you to get ahead? It was never designed for you to make something of yourself. And whenever I see people point to someone who came from a rather modest beginning, quote unquote, make something of themselves, that is so small a number of people as to be statistically insignificant. There are more exceptions to prove the rule that whatever class you're born into, that's the class you're meant to stay in, and getting out of it is increasingly difficult. You can't make anything of yourself nowadays. You can't get ahead in the world of business without having money, prestige, power, and influence. And the only way to have that is to already be a member of that class. That's just the realities of it, and it's been that way ever since. This country has been founded on a class system. It was founded by rich white folk who owned land. And everything that was put into place was done so to protect them from the rabble, from the masses. And what you see is the systematic implementation of that over the years. There has been a systematic disregard for legitimate grievances of the people of this country. This flies in the face of the supposed founding documents of the sainted founding fathers that everybody wants to point to for, the justification for having this patriotic fervor for this country. Well, we've already reached 1984, and for those of you who are worried about the imminent arrival of World War III, we're already there. We've been fighting World War III since 2001, at least. It's only a matter of time before all of the nations are drawn into it, but we are already fighting World War III. And we already have 1984 Newspeak, where Barack Obama calls war humanitarian. War is peace. And we've been at war in Afghanistan now for 10 years. So we're fast approaching the idea of we have always been at war with Eurasia. We have always been at war with Oceania. So much so that people don't even think about it anymore. So what's going on in Libya is not even anything of concern. Even though this is in direct contradiction to everything that this country is supposed to stand for, which only goes to prove that this country stands for nothing. Everything that you've been told is a lie. Thus, the people in power control the past, so they control the present, and they will control the future. People want to talk about solutions. I have political solutions on my website, platformforthefuture.com, which unfortunately right now is undergoing upgrade and maintenance, but hopefully we'll be back online shortly. But it's been there for a long time. We can't really fight things from a political perspective because what we've seen is exactly what the fraud of the Declaration of Independence wanted to try to show. They wanted to show that King George had treated them badly, and that thus they were entitled to declare their independence from this tyrannical king. Well, what do we have today? And what have we had over the years? You've had the sedition, the anti-sedition laws, all of these different things, people jailed for, showing the corruption in government, whistleblowers put into jail. We have people who are being held without charge against the Constitution. We have all of these invasions of our privacies and rights, and we have people talking about liberty and talking about a redress of their grievances, which are continuously ignored, and not only ignored, they are compiled and they are added to by the government. This is the exact same situation that the founding fathers, oh, the sainted ones that they were, all wanted to try to foist off in the scam of the independence and the scam of the Revolutionary War. So, if it was good enough for them, it should be good enough for us. But what I say, as far as solutions go, we don't need a revolution against the government of the United States, and I would never call for such a thing, because it would be pretty much doomed to failure anyway. But I'm not for bloodshed. I'm not for bloodshed. And that's what you would get. Quite frankly, a lot of people would die, and nothing would be solved. What needs to be done is the entire corporate apparatus that runs this government behind the scenes needs to be dismantled. And the more creative ways that people can think to do this, the better off it would be. The fact of the matter is that people can have an effect on the operation of business, corporation, and the running of banks without engaging in violent behavior. There is civil disobedience, of course. Don't direct it against the government. Direct it against banks and corporations. And there is also the idea of the interruption of the flow of commerce. Prevent them from conducting business. If, say, I don't know, I'll give you an example of a hypothetical situation that I'm in no way advocating, but just saying. What if the major internet hub for Goldman Sachs, lightning fast trading programs ran over, were to be cut or smashed? Gee, that might affect their ability to do their flash trading and affect them getting profits on all of their fraudulent transactions. So that would be something that would affect this corporate monstrosity that runs this country. And then, if, like computer terminals that held information on people's debts, like in the movie Fight Club. If a credit card company's computers that held information on who owed them money and how much were to, be destroyed some way in a tragic accident, well, that would affect, them. Even if it caused them time in rebuilding their records from backups, it certainly would be a hindrance and cost them money. Those are things that are just hypothetical, you understand. I'm in no way suggesting that people should cut the trunk lines to Goldman Sachs and other banks and finance companies and investment houses. And I am in no way suggesting that people smash the computers of Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, and other credit card issuing companies. I'm in no way suggesting that acts of vandalism and destruction of property that do not affect or injure human beings in any way would be something that I would endorse or get behind as a solution. I'm merely illustrating those as things that, if they tragically occurred, would be positive steps from a broader economic point of view, because it would cause problems to the oligarchical people who are actually running the show behind the scenes. This country was never about freedom. It was never about getting ahead. It was never about the promotion of individual liberty. Never. And it won't be in the future unless something is done to crush the corporate oligarchical control of this country. Doing anything against the government is really pointless. You've already seen people who are supposedly your representatives laugh in your face and lie to you repeatedly over and over again when you bring your grievances to them. Why not tax the rich more instead of cutting the Social Security benefits that I have a right to by virtue of the fact that I've paid into this system all my life? Well, corporations are more important than you. It's as simple as that. And until the corporate influence is gone, until it has been smashed and destroyed, by perfectly legal means, understand, but it would be a shame, and it would be terrible tragedy, you know, if J.P. Morgan Chase's computer systems were all smashed and burned. And it would be a terrible tragedy if all of the internet trunk lines going into Goldman Sachs were to suddenly be cut and ripped out. You understand? Only going after the corporate oligarchical structure with civil disobedience and acts of protest can you have any effect on the government, and it would be by proxy. And if, as some have said, the government would come out in force to protect these businesses, then, of course, the jig will be up, because it will illustrate to whoever is still living with their head buried in the sand or firmly up their ass that the government is a stooge of these very corporations. Then they will have no choice but to acknowledge that fact as well. And hopefully that will encourage them to become active, thus increasing the number of people who can engage in this type of behavior. And if you really want to look at someone to be proud of and something to be proud of, don't look at the stupid founding fathers who founded nothing and declared independence from nobody and fought a meaningless war, killing people for nothing. Look instead at yourself and people around you that you can build a community around, and that you can have some sort of faith in your own willingness to engage in activity that will bring about the kind of freedom, liberty, and the kind of country that you actually want to live in the future. Something that you could be proud of.